Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I wanted to talk about Carl Rogers' ways of being. So, Carl Rogers was an American psychotherapist. He was a pioneer of the humanist movement, and his school of therapy was called client centered therapy or person centered therapy. And he was very interested in how a relationship can be cathartic or healing to individuals. And he laid out specific conditions for how it is that relationships can facilitate psychological healing. And these conditions revolve around three, what I'm calling ways of being. One of them is positive regard, the second is empathy, and the third is congruence. What I want to do in this video is walk through what those specific ways of being mean, how you can embody them, and then at the end, I'll try to synthesize what we discuss and orient the overall discussion towards personality development. So, what exactly is a way of being? I think you can conceptualize it as a mindset or an attitude, but I believe it's more effectively thought about as something that's embodied, something that you not only think about, but you also feel and act out. Perhaps it's best thought of as a pattern of attention, but I won't go too far into that rabbit hole. But your attention essentially shapes a large part of your experience in the world, which means specifically it shapes how you see other people and how you perceive the meaning that they're communicating to you. And so, meaning isn't something that's just in the words that are spoken by the individual when you're listening to them. You play a role in the generation of that meaning and how you experience the meaning that they're trying to convey. And a large part of that, like I mentioned, is predicated on your attention or your way of being. So if we accept all of that, then these different ways of being will lead to different experiences and different meanings, and therefore potentially different forms of healing in the relationship. So the first way of being I want to talk about is called positive regard. Now, from my understanding of reading Carl Rogers, and really these ideas are predicated on his books, A Way of Being and On Becoming a Person, unconditional positive regard, how he called it specifically, referred to the stance of non judgmental encouragement and compassion for the individual. So when I'm listening to you, if I want to have a stance of positive regard, I am not evaluating you in the sense that I'm thinking what you're doing or saying is good or bad. Even if you say something that I might deem as immoral, let's say you confess something to me in a state of vulnerability, I might get frustrated, I might get angry, I might be disappointed in you, but it's not necessarily important while I'm maintaining this stance of positive regard to express that negative emotion to you. To have this stance of positive regard is to believe that you're worthy of attention and love and care and nurturance, regardless of what you've done or perhaps what you're going to do. And in this moment, when I'm listening to you, I just want you to feel comfortable and safe. And I want you to believe that you can tell me whatever it is that you want to tell me and just know that I'm on your side. And so that's one of the ways to think about positive regard. And then again, Rogers used the word unconditional positive regard to note that it's really this form of compassion and encouragement regardless of the individual's past or regardless of what they're saying right now. Sweating. So empathy, we'll move on to that second way of being. Empathy is the ability to understand. It's the ability to understand the meaning that's being conveyed by the other person. And again, just a quick side tangent on meaning. Meaning is not only captured in words. Words perhaps are better thought of as the transmitters of meaning or the pointers to meaning, but meaning is distributed throughout words, images, bodily expressions, unconscious behaviors. It's also predicated on the individual's past and their anticipations of the future and the current context and who you're talking to. So there's so much that goes into meaning. And when you're trying to empathize with someone, you really want to open yourself up as much as possible. You will often, when you're conversing with other people, have all of these different thoughts and images and feelings fluttering in your mind, as well as moral judgments, perhaps as you're criticizing the other person or thinking about the goodness or badness of their behaviors or whatever it is that they have going on in their situation. You want to quiet those as best you can because you have limited attention and you have limited cognitive bandwidth, and to capture the most of the meaning of what the other person is trying to express to you, you need everything working on your side. And so you're going to set aside your moral values for a second. You're going to set aside your attitudes and your feelings to a degree, and you're going to imagine, as the individual is talking to you, what it's like to see the world through their eyes. You're going to do your best to imagine yourself as if you wanted what they wanted or felt what they felt or went through what they went through. And when they're done talking, this is a behavioral practical tip to express empathy. You're going to summarize what they said back to them and then ask if they agree with your interpretation of their expression of what they just communicated to you. And to the degree that you successfully do so, well, then you're demonstrating to them that you heard them, that you understand, and that you can relate to whatever form of experience that they just told you about. And empathy is different from positive regard in a sense because when you're trying to convey positive regard, you are, again, encouraging and demonstrating compassion to this individual. In a sense, you don't even have to understand what it is they're going through. They could say whatever to you, broadly speaking, and to demonstrate positive regard, you just want to let them know that you're there for them and express, again, your belief that they are worthy of love. When it comes to empathy, you're not expressing negative judgment, but you're also not expressing positive judgment. You're more so just focused on being like a mirror to them and reflecting back what it is that they said in a way that they deem is appropriate and in a way that they deem demonstrates that you understood what they were saying. And I think one of the main reasons that empathy is a helpful way of being when it comes to generating, how should you say this, playful or meaningful relationships is that it's very difficult oftentimes for most people to look at themselves and to understand what they're thinking about and to check on their own psyche. And so, what you do when you're demonstrating empathy is you're helping to offload some of that work. If I'm trying to think about myself, oftentimes I have to think through different scenarios and situations and analyses and then try to think about what I was thinking about. Compared to in a therapeutic relationship or in an intimate relationship or just one that's cathartic, taking from Carl Rogers, it's helpful to be able to just do one of those steps. So to just lay it all out there and just say how you feel, say what you think, talk about that traumatic experience without having to reflect on it. And then the other person can do part of that reflecting, at least, or I should say, part of what they do is that they distill everything that you said down to the gist, and then they hand that gist back to you. And now, as they're re-summarizing it back to you, you can focus as much of your attention as you can on analyzing it and reflecting on it. And that can be very helpful for many people, particularly if the individual that's doing the empathizing is more verbally fluent and they can put words together in ways that help you make it make more sense so you can understand yourself better. So empathy is extremely helpful. And then the final way of being I want to talk about is congruence. So Rogers believed that you could think of yourself as an individual as someone who experiences the world, acts in the world, has emotions and feelings in the world, and then also thinks in the world. And then thinking, you could conceptualize that as thinking in words, so an internal dialogue, or even talking aloud, and so that'd be an external dialogue. And Rogers believed that congruence or authenticity or genuineness, I believe he used all these terms, was the alignment of all of those modes of reality, modes of individual reality. And to be incongruent is to feel one way and say something else, or to act one way and say something else. And the example that came to my mind as I was thinking about this video is, well, imagine that you're at a party with some of your friends, and one of your friends makes a joke at your expense and everyone else laughs at you, and maybe you feel kind of enraged about that, but outwardly you smile and you say that everything's okay, and you even give your friend a pat on the back. And so that disjunction, according to Rogers, could be one source of psychological distress and anxiety. And so he believed that it was important for a personality on its way to becoming more integrated also became more congruent. And so he thought that one of the ways that relationships could be healing was that if one individual was congruent and the other individual wasn't, well, the one who isn't could learn to develop congruency within himself by watching the other person who is congruent. And now, more so, what does it mean to be congruent? Like I said, it's the alignment of your experience, your actions, your feelings, and your words. And how this looks in a relationship is something just like being honest with the other person. It's about being honest with yourself, and it's again about being truthful and honest with the other person. And that doesn't mean that you have to be mean or rude. Maybe sometimes it does mean that you have to be mean or rude, but sometimes what people need is the corrective feedback of the true feelings of other people. And so if I'm trying to be congruent and I'm talking with someone and they say something that is kind of disappointing, well, then I might tell them that, hey, I heard what you said. Maybe I use a little empathizing, a little active listening here. I re-summarize it back to them just to make sure I understood. And then I say, oh, I all of a sudden got a feeling of disappointment. And maybe that might be the first time that someone has ever said that to the individual. And maybe, like I mentioned before, it's very difficult to listen to yourself and to pay attention to yourself. And so this could be useful feedback for that individual to maybe think again about whatever it is that happened that made me experience a feeling of disappointment. And that doesn't mean it's ultimately true. I could be wrong in my feelings as well. And so that's why it's important to have those corrective mechanisms going back and forth in a relationship. But the point of congruence is that you need some level of genuine reflection and tension with reality, even if that's the social reality. And so if everyone around you is lying and thinks that you're great, and everyone around you has too much positive regard for you, let's say, well, it could be that you're perfect, or it could be that people don't want to upset you, but that's not helpful for you in the long run, because then you won't get that corrective information that you'll need to look at yourself and to fix yourself, so that way you could actually be someone that maybe people want to be around, or maybe even one day be someone that people can admire. So those are the three ways of being. We talked about positive regard, we talked about empathy, we talked about congruence. I think that Rogers would believe that in a cathartic relationship, it's important to try to integrate all of those ways of being as best you can. But he also noted that the different ways of being serve different functions more optimally than others. And so Rogers believed that being congruent could be your best default mode of being as you're dealing with yourself and as you're dealing with other people. Empathy could be helpful when someone else is anxious or they're distraught or disjointed. And positive regard could be helpful when someone is moving along a path already and you just want to encourage them, or maybe you want to help them generate some sort of creativity and they just need a little encouragement, a little boost. And so as you're trying to develop your personality, as you're trying to make your way in this life and answer certain questions, figure out who you are, figure out who other people are, and figure out how you could be someone that is helpful to other people, it could be useful to try to practice embodying these different ways of being in different social scenarios and just seeing how they work out and seeing if they help. The last thing I'll leave you with is just the cliche, right? It's often the case, and this has been true in my experience as well, where a man and a woman in a relationship, imagine a man and a woman in a relationship, it's often the case that the woman doesn't necessarily want the man to solve the problem when the woman comes to the man with some issue. Oftentimes, what she wants is a listening ear. And for men, oftentimes that's something that we can struggle with. In part, you could say because that's part of our natural congruency. That's part of our authenticity. It's wanting to solve the problems. But sometimes we need to be a little more empathic. And so these different ways of being can be helpful in understanding relationships, but also in understanding each person. The man can learn to develop his personality by practicing being more empathic, like I mentioned. And the woman can also learn more about herself as she understands that, well, why is it that I want to just vent and rant rather than listen to solutions? What is it about being listened to and being heard and being empathized with that is actually healing? So that's just something that I thought was useful and made sense to me in my mind. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.